Chronicles of a Play Therapist podcast is raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic, discussing mental health from a play therapy specialization, including trends, treatment approaches and techniques, theory, and the business of psychotherapy practice. Get ready to learn and play with your host, licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist supervisor, Althea T. Simpson.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chronicles of a Play Therapist podcast. I am your host, Althea T. Simpson, licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist supervisor. I am the founder of Brighter Day Therapeutic Solutions and Unicorn Life Play Therapy Training. Today's topic is a topic that may cause some emotional discomfort for listeners. So I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of that and make sure that you take the time that you need for yourself. Pause it. It's some great information. It's some necessary information. We will be talking about domestic violence and children being silent victims of domestic violence. And I want to start off by saying that I am a domestic violence survivor, a child who witnessed domestic violence from probably about first grade until middle of 10th grade year, I believe. So I am very familiar with the harmful effects of children witnessing domestic violence from a professional and personal standpoint. Domestic violence affected me as a child where I developed anxiety at an early age. And I still struggle with anxiety to this day, but I became selectively mute. And so I didn't know what that meant. No, I never got treatment for it, but I was put in special education because I would not talk. And because of my experiences in the household, being called dumb, stupid, won't amount to anything, and you could just about name any type of derogatory term that was meant to break me down as a child. But when I was in the first grade, I was put in special education because I wouldn't answer. I knew the answers, I just would not speak. Sometimes I wanted it to come out, but it just would not come out. And again, it landed me in special education. And my first debut on television, where a newscaster was doing a commentary on special education in DC public school system. And my parents signed the letter for me to be a part, the consent form for me to be a part of that commentary. And I remember just sitting there trying to keep my head down. They kept telling me, put my head up. And this was in first grade. I don't know. I think my spirit just told me that something wasn't right about that. But I didn't belong in special education because I knew the work. I was just afraid to speak. The words wouldn't come out and it was anxiety ridden. So when I switched over from the business world to social work, and I went to social work school, and that was in my 30s, my early 30s. And that was the first time that I've ever experienced therapy. But I have to say that it saved my life, and it made a lot of connections to how I was as a person, even as an adult. So witnessing domestic violence has lasting effects on children, even into adulthood. And I don't think that I would have known the impact that witnessing domestic violence as a child had on me if I had not switched from business to social work, because I don't think I would have gone to therapy to really address these things. And so it made a lot of connections for me about how I related to people. And when I say how I related to people, I really didn't relate to people. I had a very small circle. To this day, I still have a very small circle for different reasons, but I would not develop connections to people. And that had something to do with my attachment style, right? So domestic violence has a long-lasting effect on children who witness this type of violence. And so I just want you all to know that I am a therapist with a therapist. And with trauma, what a lot of people don't realize is that I've done my work, right? And I'm talking about me specifically. I've done my work, but it still bothers me. It still rears its ugly head, those negative messages. I do amazing things, and especially in the field of play therapy. And it's hard for me sometimes to accept a compliment, or I get uncomfortable with it because those messages of I won't amount to anything. I will never be anything. I will never do anything. I'm stupid. I'm dumb. All of those things sometimes come up for me, regardless of seeing what I've done, it comes up, but I have to send. But what therapy has done for me is to help me send those negative messages back to where they belong. And it's not in my head or on me, right? So I have to shift my thinking and send those messages away from my mind so it doesn't tumble or crumble what I've built, right? So those are some of the things that getting kids help. And that's why I specialized in children and adolescents and families to get them the help that they need earlier. Doesn't mean that they going to forget recovering from trauma or healing from trauma, whichever word you want to use, doesn't mean that it's not a part of you. That will forever be a part of me. And sometimes I get choked up about it, depending on which parts of the story that I'm telling. That doesn't mean I'm not healed from it. That doesn't mean I didn't address it. It means that I am emotionally connected to that story because it is my story. I'm emotionally connected to what happened because it happened to me. That doesn't mean that I did not heal from my trauma. That means that I recognize that trauma will always be imprinted in me. And the same for other children and adults who experience traumatic events in their life. So, but domestic violence is a major concern for children. It's a social problem. It impacts individuals, families, and it impacts society. The harm for these children is real. The harm for me was real. And again, going to therapy, when I switched over from the business world, the psychotherapy world or social work world, I got to experience therapy and made some connections, those missing pieces. I had no idea that that's why I thought the way that I thought and I reacted to certain situations. But the harm is real. And research shows that seeing or experiencing domestic violence is very harmful for children. They don't have to be directly harmed by it. Even when they're not hurt themselves, they can see it, they can hear it, they can imagine what is happening to a parent or a caregiver, and this makes them feel unsafe. And for me, feeling unsafe caused me severe anxiety, which took away my ability to speak, which is known as selective mutism. And again, I didn't even know that until I was in my 30s. I can't even tell you how I came out of it, but because I never received any type of psychological treatment or therapy until I was in my 30s. So I don't know when I came out of being selectively mute, but it happened and I'm glad that it did because I'm here to talk about play therapy and able to train on play therapy, something that I absolutely love. And so I'll talk more about play therapy a little bit later in this podcast, but children who are exposed to domestic violence experience emotional, mental, and social problems that can affect their development, right? It affects their ability to thrive and to develop. So psychological and emotional problems you may see children as aggressive, they may have some hostility, a lot of anxiety. Like I said, I experienced anxiety and I withdrew socially. So social withdrawal, I did not connect with a lot of people. And also they may experience some sadness or some depression, cognitive functioning. And this is not an exhaustive list of problems that children develop or can develop from witnessing domestic violence, but their cognitive functioning, such as lower verbal and quantitative skills. They may become less verbal. They may develop an aptitude for being violent or supporting violence. So, and then some of the longer term developmental problems can be depression and other trauma related symptoms, low self-esteem, isolating, withdrawing. Again, these are some longer term problems, relational problems where they can't connect with others, or relational problems where they seek out attention from others who in turn abuse them. So these are some of the effects that domestic witness and domestic violence can have on children. Some of the moderating factors, though, that increase or decrease the severity of a child's reactions to domestic violence is whether or not the child has also been a victim of physical abuse. The age of the child, the gender of the child, the amount of time that has passed since they witnessed the violence, where they live, because not everyone lives in a home. You have some families that live in shelters, you have some families that are homeless, and but that doesn't stop the violence or them experiencing or witnessing domestic violence. How a child perceives their relationship with their parents or caregivers. So these are some things that can increase or decrease the severity of a child witnessing domestic violence. So children who have witnessed domestic violence, they're also sometimes confused, right? They have confused and contradictory feelings about their loved ones, about their parents, their caregivers, about the abuser. They love the abuser, right? But they also fear the abuser, or they're terrified. They see them as dangerous. Children can get caught in the middle. So these contradictory feelings that they have, they are okay. Sometimes they get caught in the middle of the fighting, physically and emotionally caught in the middle. Children may also be worried about their own safety. Am I safe? And the safety of the parent being abused. But that doesn't negate the fact that they're still worried about the abused parent, the parent that's being abusive. Will they go to jail? What's going to happen? So when this happens, it's important for us to communicate to these children who are witnessing domestic violence is that it's okay to feel more than one emotion at the same time, such as anger and love, right? And I absolutely love double dip feelings. I use bibliotherapy, a lot of bibliotherapy when it comes to trauma, treating trauma in children, adolescents, or adults. But I'm talking about children today. And when I say children, I'm talking about younger children today. But Double Dip Feelings is a book that goes through various emotions for children with contradictory feelings. I remember when my play therapist supervisor first introduced me to bibliotherapy, and this was one of the first books that I was introduced to as far as, officially knowing or learning about bibliotherapy. And it is a staple in my practice. I absolutely love double dip feelings because it helps kids to see that, especially children who have these contradictory feelings about someone who has caused them harm. If it's a loved one, you hurt me, but I still love you and I don't understand. Something must be wrong with me. And it's not. We have to communicate to these children that there is nothing wrong with them still loving the person who abused them or causing them harm. But it's also okay if they don't like them or they, has some contempt for them. So it's so important for us to let them know that these emotions are okay. It's okay to have more than one emotion at the same time that's contradictory. It's also important to let them know that, their anger is normal. If they feel anger at either or both of their parents when this violence is taking place, we have to let them know that they can love someone and hate that person at the same time. And I know hate is a strong word, but you can't take that away from a person if that's what they feel. We have to validate what they're feeling because we're not experiencing what they're experiencing. So if they say that they hate someone, I know that a lot of people say that that's a strong word to use, but if that's what they're feeling, then that's what they are feeling. And we have to validate that for them. It's okay to love both of them at the same time. A child may be afraid or scared to tell the parent who is being abused that they still love the parent that's doing the abusing or the caregiver that's doing the abusing. And we have to let them know that it's okay for you to love both of your parents despite what's happening. What's happening, we have to let them know that what's happening is not their fault or their responsibility. to fix it. What they can do is disclose it to someone that they feel safe to disclose it with, a trusting adult, right? So, but letting them know that they can't fix it. And so these messages, helping these kids understand these messages or messages like this can help them to explore and cope with their feelings. Many children who witness domestic violence need support around understanding, recognizing, and expressing anger in healthy ways. Anger is a natural emotion. We all get angry. We may show it differently, but we all get angry. So that's a natural emotion, but we have to help them to express it in healthy ways. I have an aggressive playroom. Like, I primarily worked with children who have been victimized and abused, and they would have this anger and it would erupt in school, at home. And what I did was I took my adolescent teen playroom and I got the permission from my teenagers because that room was set up just for them. I have a playroom that's for younger children, but I wanted a space for my teens. And so I created a teen adolescent playroom. So I started seeing less and less adolescents. And so but I still had to get their permission. I felt I needed to get their permission to turn their room into an aggressive playroom because I saw that more space was needed for these kids to act out their aggression in a safe place and know that it was okay. So I turned my teen room into an aggressive playroom. And I had to upgrade my, what do you call it, a gaming system for them to give me permission to use that room for little kids because it did say it was for teens. But I created this playroom, this aggressive playroom, and I saw the transformation of kids being able to get it out. And what I would say to these little humans is that not everyone can handle your anger. So if you can do your best to hold on to it until you get here and you can just let it out here, and then we can help you learn ways to let this anger out in more appropriate ways in school and at home, but you can just play it out. And so I have all types of aggressive toys and action figures or superheroes, whatever you want to call them, in this playroom. And so I have swords, I have grenades, I have knives, I have police uniforms, army gear, all of that stuff in this aggressive playroom for them to play out whatever it is that they need to play it out. And the biggest thing is the space, because it's an open room, enough for them to just act out whatever aggressive fantasies that they have. And to see that, and they would check with me to see if it was okay to continue. And I would turn my head, or give them a nod, letting them know it's okay. This is your space to let that anger and that aggression out because that's what they need. But they were given a safe space to do this. And while I'm watching them, I'm primarily tracking what's happening. And my involvement in their play depends on the stage of treatment. So they need to be able to let this aggression out. But for when they're at home and they may not have an aggressive place to be aggressive, I would prefer to do that in a safe, contained place like my office and try to secure an agreement with the kids and to see the difference after a couple weeks of them just being able to let that out without any judgment, without any punishment. But if they're at home or in school and they need to let that out, some suggestions would be to allow them to like jump rope or do jumping jacks and march around, do some running in place or run from one end of the room to the next end of the room, some shouting into a pillow to just let that out. They need to let it out. They can draw, they can do some drawing or sketching or scribbling. Of course, I get permission from parents and I explain to parents why this is so important and try to modify, depending on the parent, what kids can do to let this anger out. But balls of toilet paper or paper towels, wetting them up, and throwing, or some clay or Play-Doh balls and throwing those against the wall, or having a bullseye. You have those bop bags that kids can use. So there are so many things to help them be able to get this out in a non-therapeutic environment too, that's safe. So with us, the healing begins with relationships, right? So for children who are traumatized, and I'm talking specifically about domestic violence, because it's domestic violence, it has this way of bringing harm to kids that people don't realize. And that's what makes them often silent victims of domestic violence, where people were focused on the abused or the abuser, but the children are, a huge part of this as well. So healing begins with relationships. And for me, and again, these are my opinions, my experiences, take it or leave it, use what's helpful, toss what's not, but I cringe when I hear mental health professionals saying, when clients ask them a personal question, their immediate response is to tell the client that I'm not your friend, or you don't pay me to talk about me. Newsflash, they know they're not your friends. They know that they're in a professional environment and you set the stage, but does it has to be so rigid where you can't even tell a client and really they probably don't even want to be your friend after you like blurt out an expression like that. They may not even want to continue treatment with you. But at any rate, what we do is relational. So you don't have to word vomit your life to a client. That would be unprofessional. But you can't tell a client whether or not you like grilled cheese, or for me, I like grilled cheese and grilled peanut butter and jelly. And my clients know that because we do that. I cook it in my office in some sessions because food can be nurturing, right? And the population that I work with, children in foster care, families in foster care, sometimes that nurturance need to come into the sessions. So they know that about me, that I love hot dogs, right? But I don't like them boiled or in the microwave. And that's why I have a hot dog roller in my office. So, they know that about me. That's something that gives them a piece of connection. They need to be able to connect to us. They want that connection and they understand. And if they don't, you can let them know that professional connections and professional relationships are good, but they need to be able to connect to us. And that's where they coming from when they're asking you questions. Now you can determine how much information or what information you share. And for my clients, I tell them, ask me what you want to ask me. If it's too personal, or if it's, crossing a boundary, I will let you know, right? So you can do something like that. But I think that we have to get out of that mindset that our clients are not human. They're just clients that come in and we're supposed to help them with their problem. This is their process. And our clients live where we live. They work where we work. They shop where we shop. They're human. Right? And you can set the boundaries, appropriate professional boundaries, but to tell a client that, I'm not your friend, or you don't pay me to talk about me, that's so insensitive and it stalls their work, right? What is it that you want to know about me? And how is this going to help me help you? That's a different approach that can make all of the difference in the world when you are especially when you're working with traumatized clients, whether they're children, adolescents, or adults. That can make all of the difference in the world, right? The intervention in itself is developing a therapeutic rapport with your client. That's an intervention, developing that therapeutic rapport with your client. What we do is relational, and the healing begins with the relationships. As mental health professionals, our relationship with a child who witnesses domestic violence can be the most powerful tool we have to assist them in the healing from these traumatic events. If a child discloses being witness to domestic violence, these are some helpful steps or some steps that may be helpful for you. Let them know that they have done the right thing by telling you. Because, in a lot of families, it's like, you don't tell our business stay in the house. For my family, it wasn't even that, because it didn't matter the domestic violence. My family, we did a lot of family things together. So, and that's another thing about domestic violence is my childhood wasn't all bad. We did a lot of stuff together as families. We went to the movies, we went to the carnival, we had movie nights, we had game nights, we ate dinner together. So it was kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in my household. You never knew. And then it was like, not all families keep people out to not shine a light on the domestic violence, because my household was kind of like the household where everybody came. My family even took in other kids for whatever reason. And I used to think when I was a kid, like, why in the heck they want to stay here? What in the world? And yes, this is what I thought as a kid. Why would they want to be here with all of this going on here? So just because people are coming over to someone's house and they're entertaining and engaging doesn't mean that there's a private hell not happening in that household too. But for most families, it's like, or a lot of families is like, don't tell our business, what happens in our house, stay in our house. So you let them know that it's okay. They did the right thing by telling you, right? But you have to be responsible with what they tell you and not just dismiss it, especially if you're just afraid that you're going to lose clients and stuff. That's not what we do, right? We are mandated reporters, but I'll talk about that, right? So, but letting them know that they did the right thing by telling you. Let the child know that it's okay to talk about what happened. But even if they don't want to talk about what happened, that's okay too. We have to be intentional about how we get information, not because, oh, this is a great Lifetime movie story, right? Or you're intrigued by what happened. You have to be careful when clients are disclosing. You have to be monitoring them, being aware of how it's having a response on them. Their body language. We have to pay attention to that. And sometimes we have to stop the disclosing, right? Just to have to ground them and make sure that they're okay. And that's why training in different areas of trauma is so important, and not just reading an article or two and taking a 6-hour training and saying you're a trauma professional. That doesn't get it. So we have to be aware of when our clients are disclosing and the effect that it's having on them. So, and that goes along with listening to what they're disclosing and let them know, again, that the abuse is not their fault. Even if they forgot to make their bed, and that's what the abuser is focusing on with the other abused parent or caregiver, it's still not the child's fault. Yes, you forgot to make your bed, but it's not your fault that the abuser decided to abuse. And we have to make those distinctions for children. Explain to the child what you're going to do next. I explain to my clients if I have to make a report. I can make the report with you. I've developed and kept more relationships. Now, you don't have to let the client know or the family know, but for me, I've been doing this since 2005. I let a family know. I let the parents know when I have to make a report. I want them to know that that report came from me. And then I have to repair that. They may be upset, but in the beginning, when I am doing confidentiality and its limits, I let them know what the limits of confidentiality is, and that if I have to make a report, I'm going to let you know that it was me. They know that up front, and I can always take them back to that if I have to make a report like, hey, remember when we first met, that first session, and I talked about confidentiality and its limits? I have to remind them that even if they're not upset about it, I remind them that, remember in that session when I gave you confidentiality and its limits, and I told you that if I have to make a call, I'm going to let you know. but I'm going to make that call. This is that time. But let kids know that this is what you're going to do after you get this information. So don't forget that you're a mandated reporter. It's not your job to investigate, it's your job to report. Sometimes mental health professionals, and I am a social work supervisor, and I have some supervisees and even some professional licensed therapists who I do professional consultation with. They want to know more. And my question is, why do you need to know more? Why do you need to know more? Not to say, and it's like checking it. There's nothing wrong with wanting or needing to know more. It's like, what's your motives for wanting to know more? What are you going to do with this information? Is it information that you want so you can get likes on Facebook in these Facebook groups, these professional Facebook groups? Or is it information that I'm going to implement in treatment? I need to decipher this so I can set up the best treatment possible for this child and their family. But when it comes to reporting, being a mandated reporter, is not your job to investigate, it's your job to report. You want to model nurturing in your interactions with children who have been traumatized or abused, witnessing domestic violence. You want to make sure that you create a nurturing environment for them, and your interactions with them are that of a nurturing nature. You want to help them develop their own safety plans. And when I say developing their own safety plans, it's like, what can you do to be safe when your parents or your caregivers start fighting or this violence starts? What can you do? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Sometimes that's going to be seeking safety outside of the home. Who is a trusted neighbor that you can go to so you don't get safe? But sometimes they're not able to get out of the home. And so it's important, for one of the most important safety strategies is to teach the child that it is never a good idea for them to intervene, but instead to find your safe place. And this safe place could be real or imagined. Like I said, who is it? Can you call a family friend or a family member? Is it safe for you to go to a neighbor's house if you can get out? But sometimes you have to, when I say imagine, they have to go find that safe place within themselves and grounding themselves and going on a journey, to safety, out of the way, right? For me, my safe place was under the bed. I would under the bed, in the back room, in my brother's room, under their bunk beds. I wanted to be as far away as possible from that, right? And so their room was all the way in the back. And so that was my safe place. Before I even knew about working with children in domestic violence, I knew that I had to find a safe place, right? So we want to help them to create that safety. And I think my safe place, even now, I think that's why I so enjoy watching old television shows, right? Matlock, Black and White, Perry Mason. I like the color, the newer ones, the colored ones too, the ones that's in color, but I really love Black and White, Perry Mason. I used to watch Banachek and Ironside and all of those types of Columbo. Absolutely love Columbo. And although those were associated with something negative back in the day, because I watched TV, so I wouldn't have to come out into a space where you have to come into the living room to go out of the front or the back door and stuff, but I would have to come past my parents. And it was just safer because I didn't know what would pop off. So I just preferred to watch TV. And so, but the thing about it now, those things bring me a source of comfort because I love doing it. On Sunday, what am I doing? Watching old TV shows, eating popcorn and Butterfingers, right? That's my self-care. Is also, although it's connected to something that was negative, as an adult, I can use it as continued self-care, right? So we want to make sure that we are helping these kids create a safe space for them, whether it's real or imagined. That's a source of comfort for me. The use of play and other expressive mediums can help children to make sense of and process their experiences through the use of symbols and metaphors. A lot of what we do is metaphorical in the play therapy room, but that allows them to gain safe distance from that traumatic material. That's why when, you have to have a mixture of miniatures when you're using sand tray, and you want to make sure that you have like animal families, because they can still work through their experiences, but keeping that safe distance because they're not using people like figures. But it's good to have a mixture of toys and figures in your play therapy toolkit, because again, it allows them to gain safe distance from traumatic material when they're using symbols and metaphors. Play therapy allows the client to communicate or express feelings that cannot be put into words. Play therapy is magical, y'all. I use it for myself, right? So a lot of these activities, I do them, and even when I train, that's why I would have to say I would think 98% of my training is experiential, because I think that as mental health professionals, we need to experience, even if it's not dealing with traumatic material, we need to experience those activities and exercises that we are going to ask clients to do in therapeutic spaces. So that's why in my training, we do those activities, we walk through them, we process them. The processing is completely voluntary, but I still ask them, other mental health professionals, to at least do the activity. Even if you're not going to share it, do the activity, because you need to experience what you're going to ask a client to experience, especially around traumatic material. Because we are resourced better than most of our clients. And what I mean by that is that we have the education, we have the training, we have the knowledge. And if an activity brings out a negative experience or response for you and you're resourced, you may need to modify that for a client or do some other things before you have them do that activity. And what comes to mind is trauma narratives. You want to do some baseline narratives if your client is not properly resourced to start doing trauma narratives right away. Children are able to enhance their problem-solving skills through creativity. That's the great thing about play therapy. It's creative-based work towards healing and recovering. When I say creative-based work towards healing, play therapy is not just for trauma. Play therapy can be for everyday life situations, everyday life stressors. It could be for ADHD. It could be for anxiety. Not everyone who has anxiety has experienced a trauma. Not everyone who has depression or depressive symptoms has experienced a trauma, but play therapy is still useful for those concerns as well. Play therapy also creates opportunities for children to gain mastery and create a sense of control over their own world. Child-centered play therapy is something that, child-centered play therapy, I am trained in it, I use it, but that's not something is not a modality that I prefer. And I think it's just my mindset and my personality, but I've still trained in it to know how to use it, because it is best for kids in some situations. But child-centered play therapy would be a good treatment approach for children who witness domestic violence, because it fosters resilience through exploring alternate outcomes in a safe environment where they're able to do this. The children get to express or release unacceptable thoughts and feelings, and that reduces the likelihood of them inappropriately acting out in real life situations. Hence why I created Aggressive Playroom, for them to be able to express and release unacceptable thoughts and feelings in a contained place and move it away from home and school in those real life situations. So some of the play therapy activities, like I said, child-centered play therapy is great for children to be able to let things out, but sometimes I move more into directive and non-directive play therapy. And so when I'm not using child-centered play therapy, I love using Color My Heart or Colors of My Heart activity. This is a classic activity that's great for a ton of reasons, but you can use it. You tell the child to pick some feelings and represent those feelings in the heart. I typically ask them to tell me something about those feelings or a time where you felt this, right? You can process it accordingly. It's a classic activity. I absolutely love it. This is one of my all-time favorites. It's one of my all-time favorites. And I've used it with children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families. So yeah, and then so I also use coloring sheets to help children identify various emotions. And what I do is I can say, hey, what emotion is on that character's face? I wonder what's going on in their head. What do you think? What do you think is going on? Tell me what you think is going on in this picture or in this coloring sheet. But those are some ways that I work with children who are victims of child witnessing domestic violence. Some of the sessions are also with parents, and those should focus on safety planning with the parent or caregiver and the child, including addressing any visitation issues, if there are visitation issues, or they have to visit with if it's been deemed safe for the child to visit with the abusive parent. You want to make sure you're addressing any safety planning or visitation issues in sessions with parents and the children. Some parent sessions or weekly consultations for the non-offending parents or caregivers can help them to understand the effects of domestic violence on their children, as well as understanding more about their child's feelings and experiences. Again, not keeping them as unheard victims or silent victims of domestic violence. And when you think about doing therapy in domestic violence situations, you want to assess the abusing parent or caregiver to make sure that it's safe for them to come in to treatment, because you want reunification to happen when necessary or when appropriate, but it has to be safe, and treatment has to occur before reunification can be successful. And so you want to make sure, if that abuser, for me, if the abusive parent is not in their own treatment and hasn't been in treatment, then I don't do family therapy or bring them into sessions because of the safety. I don't even do the safety assessment to see if it's safe for them to come in if they cannot tell me that they have received treatment or they're in treatment themselves. So you want to make sure that it is safe. Safe for the child, safe the environment, safe for the child physically and emotionally, and the other parent, the non-offending parent. I also want you to think about mental health professionals working with the Black community. We are a communal people, and there's a lack of trust in systems, and especially in the medical profession. So please be mindful of systemic racism, discrimination, and microaggressions when you are working with the Black community around any mental health issues, but especially around issues of domestic violence. So here's a note to mental health professionals. That's who this podcast is for. Hopefully the information is useful for non-mental health professionals, but this podcast is for mental health professionals. And so my note to mental health professionals around working with children who have traumatic experiences, but especially witnessing domestic violence, is important for you to know that children are not just exposed to domestic violence. They are living with it just as the adult who is being abused. So stating that a child is merely affected by domestic violence diminishes the impact on them and therefore invalidating their experiences. So recognizing child witnesses as domestic violence victims could improve your treatment interventions and responses to the needs of these children receiving mental health treatment. And you need to be trauma-informed practitioners. And again, it goes beyond reading a couple of articles and taking a couple of workshops. You need to be trauma-informed practitioners. So here are some treatment considerations. It is necessary to help clients slowly shift their attention from what is not working in their lives and encourage them to focus on any area of experience, external or internal, where there is better functioning. So shifting that focus from always what's not working to what is working, or they can and how they can function better. Helping clients move out of that trapped state of distress and teaching them self-soothing and helping them to complete that fight-flight response, right? Because trauma is not always psychological, it's more physiological. And so it's important for clients to be able to complete that fight and flight responses that come along with being traumatized. And you have to stay in an empathetic response. You have to respond empathetically with your clients. The therapist must be available to listen to the client's narrative, even when it's distressful for them. That's what supervision and peer consultation is for, and even having your own therapist. Like I said, I am a therapist with a therapist. How can I not have a therapist? I'm a trauma professional. I deal with other people's trauma material that may cause some reactions in me. So in order for me to not just show up, but show up and be present for my clients, I have to have my own space to address my reactions and emotions. And that's why I have therapists and I do professional consultation and supervision with other licensed professionals depending on the issue, because trauma, like I said, I'm a trauma professional, but there are different types of trauma that I address that requires me to get professional consultation in that specific area, not just general consultation. I'm very intentional about the professionals that I seek help from to help me see things differently, because I can have a block and it could be my own stuff that's coming up as well. And I need to process that to make sure that my clients are getting the best care from me. So be intentional about your training and treatment approaches, because what I do know is that childhood trauma creates emotional scars that can be reopened in adulthood. Trauma professionals and trauma practitioners, we don't and we can't slap a Band-Aid on trauma wounds. We have to suit up and understand that this is the client's process and not ours. So you may get frustrated, and that's when professional consultation, peer group consultation is super important, when you are getting frustrated because the client is not moving fast enough. Where is that coming from? Are you feeling inadequate as a mental health professional, that you're trying to rush this process or thinking that they should be further along? That's your stuff. That's not their stuff. So we have to understand as mental health professionals that it may take some time before our suture work is done. Not slapping a Band-Aid on it. We may have to do some suture work. Well, thank you for listening to today's Play Therapy informational podcast, Chronicles of a Play Therapist. This may have been, again, some difficult but necessary content and a necessary topic. So be intentional in taking care of yourself. I am Althea T. Simpson, your host of Chronicles of a Play Therapist. Thanks for playing, and until next time, play well.
Chronicles of a Play Therapist is sponsored by Unicorn Life Play Therapy Academy, where play therapy is magical. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on YouTube. Chronicles of a Play Therapist is intellectual property of Althea T. Simpson. All rights reserved.